nature, at least in the legal context. Now you have a lot of writing being done, by professionals whose primary work does not involve policy or other research. Now, therefore, at the very outset, when you talk about writing today, you are faced with very different avenues to write. Unlike, say, 15 years back in the country or 20 years back, like when we were in law school, there was no concept of, say, an online platform. There was no concept of a blog, etc. So if you wrote, you either wrote for, say, some college publication, or, the ultimate aim was to, try and achieve a peer-reviewed journal publication. Now things have dramatically changed. So when you talk about identifying something at the very outset, you need to identify what do you intend to write on, in the sense of, do you intend to write a piece which is academic in the strict sense, or do you intend to write something, which is something more contemporary in the nature of something immediate, like an update for an online journal, or something, which is a very, very burning issue, and which you would not want to, let's say, write about in detail in a peer-reviewed journal, which will essentially get published months or weeks later. So once you've identified what is really the aim behind the publication which you need to do, that is how you need to select a topic. Because the selection of a topic is going to significantly depend on what is your aim. For instance, if you intend to write for an online publication, there might be a recent judgment, say, of the Supreme Court or the Delhi High Court, which is really path-breaking. Now, you obviously want to write on this. Now, that is a very good mechanism, for instance, to select a topic. So simply the topic might be an elaboration of what the court held, how this interferes with the status quo, how it possibly pushes the law forward, or acts as a negative influence, in your opinion. Now, this is obviously a very easy way to choose a topic when you are writing for an online platform. But when you are writing for a peer-reviewed journal, or you are writing, say, for incorporation as a book chapter, then you need to look at the topic accordingly and try and see if it is something which is comprehensive enough, wide enough, or open to the level of analysis, debate, and critique, which you will evidently have to establish to be able to get a peer-reviewed journal article, or let's say, a strictly academic article published. So many a times I have seen really good, let's say, articles, or let's say opinion pieces, which unfortunately are conceptualized and submitted to the wrong platform. So sometimes you will have really dense, complex analysis running into thousands of words being sent into an online platform or a blog. Now, the problem is, because of the audience, which we will also come to, which is inherent in each platform, as also the overall format of the platform, something like that would be a terrible misfit in most circumstances for, say, an online platform. Similarly, if you write a short opinion piece, I'm not talking about case summaries here, which essentially, is more in the nature of an informative piece, as opposed to, say, a detailed critique, then if you try and send that to a peer-reviewed journal, again, there is a very high possibility that the journal will not accept it. So therefore, you choose it in the context of the platform for which it is intended. That is very, very important. So a topic should not be something which is a complete mismatch once you articulate it in the form of an eventual article for the intention of the platform to which you are going to submit it. Now, in line with the platform, again, one connected issue is audience. See, when you write for a purely academic audience, there are certain prerequisites which your, let's say, piece or your article will require. One, of course, is detailed analysis, a possible, enumeration, or let's say, a engagement with every single counter view possible to make it as comprehensive as possible. And also the kind of writing which you will do will start at a particular level or plane. Now, for instance, if you are writing an article for a journal which is recognized internationally as one of the best, say, in competition law or arbitration law, then the level of debate or discussion which you will have to begin at is going to be at a far higher level. Now, why is this important to consider? If you are going to be writing for an audience which is far more general in nature, say for an online platform, then the piece which you write will essentially have to deal with the fundamental basics, in the sense that you will necessarily have to presume that the audience which is actually reading what you are writing has to be informed about the most basic aspects or underlying normative concepts which you are dealing with in your journal, in your article. So therefore, it is important to understand who the audience is. If you write for an academic piece, for an academic journal, and if you have a audience which is very specialized in nature, then obviously if you are going to spend time on explaining basic concepts, other than when these concepts are important in a contextual manner or you need to juxtapose them, then essentially a lot of what you will be writing will be superfluous for the audience. On the other hand, if you start at a very high level right in the beginning for, say, a general audience, then a large number of your readers are going to be left completely high and dry and will not be able to engage with your piece in terms of being able to understand exactly what you're intending to say. So therefore, audience identification is very important in any academic writing or any sort of writing, and that is something you need to cater for. Now, in line with this, you also have to understand limitations. A lot of online platforms will have a word count limit. This may typically range, say, between 1,500 words to 2,500 words. Now, if you intend to do a peer-reviewed article submission, depending on the categorization of the article, you will have word limits ranging, say, between 3,000 to 5,000 to 10,000 words. You may have book chapters which go even beyond that. Therefore, also understand that if you choose a topic which is very wide ranging, which requires detailed and extensive analysis, then possibly an online platform or a magazine may not be the best choice in terms of submission of your eventual piece. So this is also something that you need to keep in mind, looking at the different kinds of platforms that are available today. Now, one important aspect, obviously, and something which I had a lot of problem with, is getting the first draft done. Now, this I really used to struggle with, when I started doing writing, after, let's say, for general consumption after I graduated. I never did much writing aside from, project submissions in law school. So once I started writing, the first draft always used to be a significant pain, and that is when you will always see a lot of writer's block developing, possibly during the initial stages. So one problem with that is it sometimes gets so frustrating that you're entirely put off by the entire whatever exercise. So at least what worked for me was that I started dictating. Now, see, earlier on, maybe 10 years or 12 years back, when you wanted to dictate, it was essentially a luxury, because either you would have to have a stenographer who would do it for you, or you had to invest in a really expensive software, say like Dragon Naturally Speaking. But now in the last few years, I have noticed that, say, for instance, if you are on iOS, then Siri, or even the dictate feature on Cortana in Microsoft Windows, they are reasonably effective now. So even if they may not have the customizability of, say, a Dragon Naturally Speaking, they do get the essential work done for you. So personally, for me, what has worked, at least in the last few years, is I always try and dictate a first draft. So always bear in mind, and this is something which one of my associates essentially has, kept and like put up on the wall in the office. It's sort of like a pop culture reference in terms of how the whole intention behind a first draft is not to get it right, but to get it written. Now, this is important because you need to have, let's say, a more humble approach or more humble expectations in terms of what the first draft will essentially communicate. So in order to get a first draft done, obviously, you need to take at least a bird's eye view or even a relatively detailed view of what the relevant material is. Now, goes without saying, you need to research very well to actually make any sort of writing effective. But when you do the research, at least the way I do it, you need to ensure that the research is read in a way in which you are able to establish a core theme and related sub-themes. Because once you have that outline in place, once you've done your initial, let's say, literature review, then it becomes much easier for you to be able to churn out a first draft, which in my personal experience, I find much more comfortable to do by using a dictate feature. therefore, speech to text. So at least for me, that works better. I am able to better articulate. Writer's block is not such an issue. And once you have that broad outline in mind, those bullet points in mind, then I find it much easier to be able to dictate a first draft. And that also helps you avoid, a lot of the problems you would otherwise have if you intend to write an excellent final version of a draft, at your very first attempt. So one way of getting over this writer's block or the anxiety which you will face initially before you're more comfortable with the manner of writing is to try and find some way, whatever way, which makes it more comfortable for you to be able to draft the first draft. Now, for instance, if you plan to use dictate, some persons may find it more lying down on a bed. You will be more comfortable dictating that way. You might want to, let's say, dictate late at night. For some people, it works better because you have less distractions to deal with. So find whatever way or manner possible in which to make the dictation or in which to make the drafting of your first draft as comfortable as possible. Now, this obviously involves a plethora of things. You need to identify material, possibly put a basic structure, in place, identify subtopics, the main topic, etc. Now, when I talk about theme, it is also important in your first draft or even, in the drafts that come subsequently to always maintain fidelity with the theme. See, because one problem is that, many a times I have come across pieces which are extremely well researched. They are well researched and in fact, in terms of the language, easy to read, well articulated. But the only problem is it goes all over the place. So essentially, in the traditional stereotypical sense, the article will have an introduction, it will have an explanatory text, and then the conclusion. But between the intro, the main text, and the conclusion, the article goes all around the place. So essentially, then what happens is that the reader, even if you've done excellent research, even if you've used good language in terms of the draft, is ultimately not really able to connect with what you are trying to say. Now, this can really ruin the effectiveness of a piece if you do not maintain fidelity to the central theme. So always remember, even if there is extensive research, control the research and control what you actually put on paper. Because in the urge to write too much, sometimes you really lose control of the theme, and which is really devastating in the ultimate scheme of things. Now, after the first draft, which I usually try and keep not very complex, it is always important to then identify counter arguments and deal with it. See, one of the reasons why we keep the first draft relatively simple is that your thought process or your chain of thought is not broken by getting into too many complexities. But once you have that basic first draft written, always try and deal with possible critiques or possible counter arguments of what you are trying to postulate. If at all it's a critical piece. If it is an informative piece, it's only intended to say, let people know of some path-breaking development or some recent case law, then of course you may not need to undertake this step. But if you intend for a piece to be critical, to be analytical, then once you have the first draft down, always engage with the counter arguments. Because the worst thing which can possibly happen is you write a piece, you deal with everything, but there is that one very important judgment or that one very important counter view which could possibly be utilized to, let's say, critique what you've written, and you've not engaged with it. See, obviously, there is always going to be critique, right? And that's the whole point of writing, because it's your view. It's not some neutral, whitewashed view which you are trying to postulate. But the effectiveness of a piece, whether it is, for whatever manner, whether it's peer reviewed or even if it is meant for online publication, the effectiveness is always better if you have been able to deal with and engage with what could be the counter arguments. Because, then it shows that you've actually thought about these, and the opinion you've expressed is not, in some vacuum, but is actually cognizant of what are the counter views on the subject. Now, this works much more easier once you have a first draft to which then you can, subject this particular exercise to. At least that's what works for me subjectively. Again, like I said, there are various ways of doing it. Now, one other important aspect is getting the format right. Now, the stereotypical format is always there. Have an intro, have the main text, have the conclusion. But in terms of the manner in which you seek to write, for instance, if you seek to write on an online publication, etc., then considering the subject matter, you need not strictly go by that. I mean, a lot of times I have seen people radically, like of the matter right in the very first sentence. But the subject is such that they are actually able to pull it off, and the entire piece has that much of an effect just because the use of the language and the use of the format surrounding the piece. Therefore, you need not necessarily stick to that age-old notion of intro, explanatory text, and conclusion. If you are able to get the format right, if the format is holistic enough, then you can actually play around with the overall structure of the piece, and sometimes you can make it all that more effective. Most importantly, please identify a natural writing style. This is extremely important. See, at the outset, it is very, very important to keep expanding one's vocabulary. Whatever language one writes in, a good wide ranging vocabulary is obviously an asset. But do not utilize artificial means to implant vocabulary in an artificial manner. Now, exactly what I intend to say is, in a lot of pieces, you will see suddenly there will be, this word which is paratrooped. Now, when I say paratrooped, what I essentially mean to say is that many a times when we find new words, when we read enough material, say, containing those words, or we read examples containing those words, we imbibe them. We imbibe them as part of our natural vocabulary. So essentially, whenever you are dictating or you are, let's say, typing out an article, your natural language is what comes to the fore. Now, if there is a word which you've randomly discovered, in some dictionary or some thesaurus, if you just throw that in the middle of a article which is otherwise written in your natural writing style, more often than not, it looks very jarring. Now, to give you an example, see, all of us know about Justice Krishna Iyer's judgments. Now, there is, of course, a wide-ranging debate about whether such writing, which is considered to be inaccessible, at all finds place in a judgment or not. But when you read the judgments of Justice Krishna Iyer, even if they are difficult to comprehend, you will rarely, if ever, find the use of that language to be artificial. Because that's just how Justice Krishna Iyer was. That language came to him naturally. But now I don't need to name examples, but you will find a lot of judgments, say in contemporary times, Supreme Court or High Court, where you will have these extremely complex and rare or esoteric words just jumbled up together into a sentence, and the end result is horrendous because it's not just a question of how bad it looks, but it's not even able to articulate the central message, and the complexity of the language actually acts as a hurdle rather than actually elevating the piece. So see, there are obviously some really beautiful words which are not in common parlance, and all of us have our subjective likes or dislikes in terms of utilizing these words. But always remember, when you use a word, be very comfortable and very aware of the context that word is used in, and try as much as possible to make it part of your natural language or your vocabulary before you actually start inputting it in articles. Because then you will not have the difficulty of this word suddenly appearing in the middle, very jarring, very uncontextual, and which essentially breaks the entire chain of thought of a reader who is actually trying to read your piece. In the same light, one other problem which usually occurs, which at least I have felt when I have written, is that once you've done 3 or 4 drafts, you'll have a first draft, you'll add to it, you'll proofread again. So proofreading is very important, checking spelling, checking grammatical errors. But one thing which I have experienced is, once you've seen a draft 3-4 times, a draft you yourself have worked on, inevitably there are certain mistakes or errors which your mind will skip over, because you're so used to reading those phrases or those sentences again and again and again, that the mind automatically skips certain very, very silly mistakes which may otherwise have been very clear to you. So this may not happen to everyone. At least for me, I think this is a problem which my pieces have. So therefore, the ideal way of getting around this is to have a third person give a read about to the final version of your article. Now, this obviously, when you submit your pieces or when you exchange your pieces or transmit your pieces to others, this also helps on the merits. For instance, you may want positive feedback or negative feedback in terms of the contents of your article. So obviously that is important. But I am talking here about something far more basic and simple, which is that sending it to a third person, even if that person is not a subject matter authority, or a subject matter expert is always good, even from the very basic viewpoint of ensuring that there are no silly mistakes or errors which remain in your piece of writing. Now, one final suggestion which I can actually make is that once your draft is ready, it is always a good idea to juxtapose that draft or compare that draft with certain other examples of articles which you might have read in the past and which made a significant impact on you. Because once you have a final version ready and you read some other article with the perspective of comparing the two, you will then be able to understand at a much deeper level as to what are possibly the omissions or what are possibly the limitations of your piece as compared to something which you find to be an excellent example of how to write on that particular topic. So see, like I said, these are issues, there are, like, I'm sure there are hundreds and millions of tips or guides in terms of how to write. This is something so fundamental. But at least when I started this entire aspect of, say, writing alongside practicing, or alongside my professional pursuits, these are the issues which I first dealt with, and which I've tried to overcome. I'm still trying to overcome. So therefore, this is basically what I believe. It's something very important, which one has to consider. And these become all the more important if you are intending to write not as a purely professional choice, in the sense that you are not in academia or you are not from a policy background, but writing for you is something which you do on the side, or which you do as, let's say, something more of a hobby. Because at least if you are full time, say, into academia, then you will have a particular, let's say, way of doing things which you will be doing again and again and again. So it will be much easier to ingrain these basic aspects. But if supposing you're a corporate lawyer or you are a litigating lawyer, then obviously your primary professional pursuit and the amount of time you spend, say, on those professional pursuits will obviously require different skill sets, will require, let's say, a different way of doing things. So therefore it becomes a little harder than to switch the mind from, say, that professional, let's say, endeavor to, let's say, writing on the side in the evenings or on the weekends. So therefore these basic, let's say, broad guidelines will definitely help to keep focus. So that is it from me. And I'm sure Alok will have a lot more to say in terms of actually how you should like structure or utilize the contents of your article in terms to be able to make it far more effective. So that's it for me, guys. I think then after that we can basically, after Alok is finished, we can then basically go on to a Q&A. Yeah, thanks.
Shall I begin, Shashwat?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, and sorry for joining slightly late. Held up for uncontrollable reasons. And let me just say, it was a pleasure to listen to George, Amit George, as he spoke about writing. It makes my task a lot more easier. I have to repeat fewer things. But let me add a few things to what he just said. And let me start with my new favorite Mark Twain quote, which is that writing is easy. You just have to cross out all the wrong words. And in it, there is a truth and there is a falsity. The truth is, writing is very easy, but it's not just about crossing out the wrong words. You should also know what are the wrong words. So let me just sort of, in the course of the next 15-20 minutes, take you through how to approach the exercise of writing, right? How do you identify these wrong words, and how do you actually ensure that what you're trying to convey reaches out to your audience? To me personally, I don't think there is a different class of writing called academic writing and a class of writing called writing for op-eds or writing for this and all that. All of writing is essentially the same activity. It is about expressing your thoughts on paper in the language of your choice. Now, obviously, if you're writing for a French audience, you will not use English. If you're speaking to a Kannada audience, you will not address them in Tamil. The difference, therefore, to me, is just about the audience. I think Amit made this point right at the start. When you're writing for an academic audience, you write slightly differently. When you write for a general audience, you write slightly differently. But at the core of it, you're not doing something dramatically different. You are doing essentially the same thing. It's just that you're addressing different audiences in the language that they're familiar with. And believe me, it's not that hard to understand, to speak in one language once you figure out the core of good writing. When you really understand what is good writing, you will easily be able to switch from academic writing to writing for an op-ed to writing a report to writing whatever, right? There are some basics, and I'm sure you'll see any number of guides on how to write well. But to me, and I'm really quoting from people better than me who've learned how to write. You really need to do only three things to write well. You need to read, you need to write, and you need to edit. That's it. There are only three things that you need to do. Unfortunately, most people don't end up doing more than one of these three things. Everyone jumps into the right part of it without the reading part of it, and everyone tries to submit without doing the edit part of it. A lot of it, Amit has already said, in very eloquent terms. I'll just try and summarize a little bit what I mean. And what I mean is that some of you, I don't know if they introduced me in the beginning, but I did my Bachelor of Civil Law in Oxford. It's a great example of a degree which is not a bachelor's degree. It's not in civil law degree, but it's Oxford, so therefore they will call it the Bachelor of Civil Law. And what I really learned there is how to read and how to write. I'm not saying that I wasn't taught basic literacy prior to this, but what is important is that reading is not just passively letting words flow over you. It's about understanding what the author is trying to say. Writing is not just collecting an assemblage of words until you hit a word limit or until it looks sizable. It's about having something to say and saying it in a manner that is effective. So this is really what I learned in Oxford, and I try and sort of explain to you why it is so important to be able to do all of this, or rather how to do all of this. So let me start with the three things that I mentioned: reading, writing, and editing. What is reading? Basically, your reading has to be wide. There is, of course, research that will go into the merits or the meat of the matter that you're writing about, but your reading should also be eclectic. You should be reading lots of different things. Start with Chetan Bhagat if you have to. I'm not going to diss anybody because they use bad language, but I'm just going to say that if reading is a habit, reading just like waking up in the morning and brushing your teeth is a habit, and the more you make reading a habit, the better you'll be able to write. Don't stop with Chetan Bhagat, for God's sake, please. Let it be the start. Let it be the gateway to you reading a lot more. There are much better authors, and to me, I can't do any better than recommend one of the finest craftsmen of the English language, which is P.G. Wodehouse. I recently found this out, by the way. And when you read P.G. Wodehouse, you think this guy, you wake up in the middle of the night, he'll come up with a beautiful sentence. But P.G. Wodehouse worked on each sentence 10 times. He wrote, scratched it out, rewrote, reworked it, saw this word fits better here, this word fits there. But instead of me trying to repeat, I'm just going to suggest everyone pick the nearest P.G. Wodehouse that you can get your hands on. The stories are silly. There is no great intellectual or moral depth to them, but they're the finest example of how you can use language. And you can use language so beautifully that you can actually hear the words ring in your head. Like it actually feels like someone is singing the language to you. And that is what reading really does. Reading really exposes you to such a wide array of writing styles, such a wide array of thought, such a wide array of research, that when you actually think about putting your pen to your paper, your finger to your keyboard, you are so much better prepared to write than if you hadn't read any of this. There's no mathematical formula to this. I'm not going to say these are good books you have to read, these are bad books you shouldn't read, but read as a matter of habit. After a while, believe you me, you will realize this is a horribly written book. I don't need a reviewer to tell me that this is a badly written book. You will be able to, in 2 paragraphs, say, this is a really bad book, I'm going to give it up. And in 2 paragraphs, you'll be able to say, this is a great book. This is the finest example of writing that I have come across. And you will be able to make the decision for yourself. But read. Read as much as you can. Read whatever you can get your hands on. It makes a difference. The second part I want to talk about is writing. Now, we all take for granted that writing is just about stringing words and sentences together. It's not. There is a reason why a lot of writers find writing hard. It is because they actually don't write enough. I had this very good piece of advice given to me by Prem Panikkar, who is one of the best writers you'll find. He writes a lot about sports, politics, history, journalism, and among everything else. You should look him up, Prem Panikkar. Read some of his writings. And one of the very good pieces of advice that he gave is that writing is a kind of exercise, right? You don't get to be an Olympic runner by waking up in the morning of the trials and trying to run. You spend 3 years, if not more, practicing for that day. Likewise, you don't get to be a good writer because one day you say, I have this brilliant thought, I'm going to express it. You're going to have to write every day. And when I say write every day, I don't mean you repeat the same 10 words again and again and again. It's about getting your mind and your body and your thinking used to the idea of expressing itself on paper or on keyboard. I started with like stupid comments on discussion boards. I would write essay length responses to somebody's inane questions on Civilization Fanatics forum. But looking back, it got me writing. It got me understanding this is how you structure a paragraph. This is how you structure a thought. This is how you structure an entire article. This is how you respond to somebody's arguments. And it need not be that you have to first aim at getting yourself published in the Indian Express, or that you have to aim for getting published in like the Harvard Law Review. That need not be. I mean, it's great if you do, congratulations, but I just think that's just a nice line to boast about in your CV, but doesn't tell me anything about how good you are as a writer, or whether you've done quality research, or whether you have something interesting to say. So if you have to write, do it daily. Maintain a daily blog. I can't think of anything better than a daily blog. Even if it is just putting your thoughts together, if you keep at it long enough, and when I say long enough, I don't mean 1 week. If you keep at your blog, if you keep at writing, if you keep respond to you. The more people respond to your writing, the better your writing gets. So if you have to write, you have to keep doing it. Somebody just asked, is it good to write on Quora? Sure. Don't find out information on Quora. It's not necessarily the best and most authoritative place, but go ahead and write on Quora. There are tons of people whom you know a million times more about law. Somebody may want to know what's the difference between section 302 and section 304 of the IPC. If you have done your criminal law and second year, you'll be able to answer that question. That is writing. You are explaining an idea or a concept to someone who does not know or would like to understand it. It is a way of getting yourself to express your thoughts on paper or in text. And as long as you do it, and if you do it consistently, you will get better at it. And when you get better at it, you will not have to ask for people, hey, can you publish this? They will come to you to say, hey, can we publish this? You have to, I mean, I know it's not the easiest for everyone. I know there are barriers of social capital. There are so many other things in the way, but it is, believe me, not that far a stretch from you wanting to get published in your favorite journal to your favorite journal approaching you to say, we have read your writing elsewhere and we think you're so good, you should write for us. Aim for that. Finally, editing. George mentioned this, talked about multiple drafts. He talked about going to the first, second, and third draft. One thing though is that, and I suffer from the exact problem that George also mentioned, that when I read my own work, I end up missing those words, those sentences which somebody else might spot because my brain fills in the gaps. It's a problem that all of us have, believe me. It's a psychological effect that our brain, like we're not really reading with our eyes, we're reading with our brain. And our brain adds in words that may not be on the text. All right, this is a very recognized problem. And if you sort of want to rectify that, the only way to do it is to give yourself space between your writing and your editing. Don't move from, okay, now I've finished writing the 2000th word of my article, I'm going to start editing it from the first word. Give yourself space, give it a day, give it two, and come back to it. Come back to that script with that manuscript with fresh eyes. Come back to it with okay, now that I have cleared my brain out of all of this thinking, let me start reading. And then you'll realize that, oh my God, how is this awful tripe ever going to get published? And that is when your work starts to become better. Always give yourself enough time to edit. And edit not just in terms of copy editing, right? It's important to do the copy editing in terms of making sure that you dot all the I's and cross all the T's and the lines make sentences, the sentences make sense and there are whole paragraphs. What you really want to do with editing is look at the structure of the piece. This is one of those things that's very important. You have to think about what should be the structure of my piece. For academic writing, this is where an abstract helps greatly, right? I find that the abstract, when I start off by writing an abstract, and at 80 words, if I'm able to summarize what I'm saying, I know I'll be able to expand upon it and bring it out and flow it out into 2,000, 2,500 or 5,000 words. But more than that, even within your piece, you should be able to say, this thing follows, this thing follows, this thing follows, this thing in a logic manner. It's about basically saying to the reader, this is what you can expect. And before it goes to the reader, you're telling yourself, this is what I am going to write about. Always, when you've done with your introduction, always have a structure. It may not be necessary for much for shorter pieces, like say maybe an 800 or 900 word op-ed may not need that kind of structure, in which case you'll have to keep it in your head. But always have a structure which says out, this is what I'm going to say, this is how I'm going to say it, and at the end of the piece, this is what you can expect to take away. All right. This is what you, as the reader, will know that you did not know when you started reading this piece. That is the aim that you should be going for. And so many times when we do the research, when we write, when we put on a lot of thoughts on our paper, we forget the structure. We forget the structure, and that's the important part of editing. Don't just worry about whether you get it grammatically and grammatically correct and all the spellings right. Also look at whether your structure works. Does each paragraph follow logically from the previous paragraph? Does each part of the piece follow from the previous part? This is what makes a difference between a well-edited piece and a really bad edited one, even though the two people may have exactly the same level of knowledge, the same level of writing skills. The fact is, if you're not able to edit yourself to make sure that what you say follows logically step by step and that it can be followed, then it's of no use. It will really stand out if you can make out this stuff. So to summarize, read widely, read holistically, write often, write well but write, and finally learn to edit. Learn to edit so that your pieces make sense. Learn to edit so that what you say makes sense, and learn to edit so that whatever you write makes a lot of sense. So on that note, I will finish and I will keep myself open to questions. I don't want to go on and repeating the same thing. I think Amit has covered it fairly exhaustively in his talk. But if I have to summarize what I have to say, read, write, edit. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So now we can take up questions. There are some questions in the Q&A section. So if you could just, if you both could look at the Q&A section.
Sure. Okay. I think the first question is for you, Dr. Amit George.
Yeah. So therefore, see, this question, I unfortunately will not be able to, shed light on what exactly is intended. But see, I don't think there can be any straitjacket classification in terms of, what publication can really mean, in the sense of the context in which it is being sought for. For instance, for PhDs, for getting a PhD, or let's say you need to get into, let's say, some academic position, usually the emphasis is on a publication in a peer-reviewed journal. But at least I think from the perspective of, say, a senior advocate designation, a publication will mean any expression of your view in writing. So therefore I don't think there will be a straitjacketed, or they should be a straitjacketed let's say, classification in terms of what constitutes a publication. Ultimately, I think what should be seen is the quality, of the concerned publication and how much it's actually, added to the public discourse on the law. And frankly speaking, this is a very, very virgin territory. Very few high courts have, in fact, actually, I think, released any sort of a guideline as to, how they will judge this particular aspect. So therefore, that, of course, is a call to be made in the future. But I don't think, that there can be any, let's say, strict classification. And if any budding lawyer is interested in scoring high, I think the entire purpose should be to, let's say, to give out pieces which actually contribute to the law. Because as I said, you might have a piece or you might have an article which is merely informative. So therefore, but I think what will really stand you out in terms of, say, a senior advocate designation is in terms of your pieces, which actually critique, or which actually, let's say, get into virgin territory and actually, let's say, add to the law as we know it. So yeah, that's how I would answer it. Yeah, Alok, you want to take the next one? Whatever you like.
Let me see. Something that has not already been covered. Is it a good idea to juggle writing more than one paper at a time? Don't do that. It's going to, I guess, see, there are some people who can, some brilliant people who can, but it's because to them writing is as easy as breathing. So therefore, it is something that they can possibly do. But focus on one paper at a time, especially if you're a law student. Focus on one paper at a time. Focus on making sure you got that published, you get it published somewhere, whether it's like an op-ed or whether it's like a piece of academic writing in some place in India. But focus on getting that published as opposed to trying to write different pieces.
Right. Well, so I think there is a good question in sense, how helpful will maintaining a regular blog be in the long run? Yeah. So as Alok mentioned, basically it is obviously a great idea if at least, it acts as some sort of an incentive for you to be able to write regularly. So maintaining a blog, academic or otherwise, is excellent, but the only issue is one of commitment. So once you set up a blog, it is not something which you can just do for say 7 days, 10 days, 15 days, a month. Like some of the best blogs out there, say on constitutional law or otherwise, these have, really, like a lot of blood and sweat which has gone into it. So therefore, it is obviously excellent in terms of a personal advancement or a, personal analysis of what you will be capable of if you are able to commit. But always remember that, ultimately, if you need to make the blog work as an end in itself, then it requires a seriously long-term commitment. But yeah, like Alok mentioned, any form of writing is good, but also always remember what you write stays online. So therefore, that you need to keep in mind. That's all.
Yeah. Let me see. What would be an interesting question to answer? Do you think young professionals have enough to say, though they haven't accumulated tons of experience yet? We've been working and still hesitate because I think I couldn't possibly know enough about whatever issue I'm thinking about. This is, and I'm not being sexist, but this is a problem that I have heard from women, because women are constantly told that you are not good enough. And I am answering here this to say, if women operate with the level of false confidence that most of us men have, you will not have this question. My point simply is that you don't need to make sure you know absolutely enough about everything. Please do not assume that if you have to write an article critiquing the latest judgment of Arun Mishra on reservations, that you need to know everything. You need to know every last judgment about reservations in the matter. It could be that you're talking about one argument that didn't make sense in the case and that was decided wrongly by the court. That is still something novel. Somebody hasn't thought about it, somebody hasn't looked about it. And if you're quick enough on the buzzer, it may be that you're the first person to have highlighted this issue anywhere in the world. You don't need to accumulate experience. You don't need to accumulate tons of knowledge. Do not let it paralyze you into inaction. This is an issue that I try to encourage a lot of my women colleagues, that please don't feel the need that you have to research every last thing, because that is a great excuse for paralysis. It will lead you to a dead end where you won't know what to write, because you've read so much, you've covered so much, your own thoughts will get drowned. Keep your idea, keep your argument at the forefront of it. Keep your argument that, okay, this is what I want to say. I need to do the research to make sure that I'm making sense, but I don't need to write an entire thesis on what should essentially be a 900-word op-ed. So please disabuse yourself of the notion a first-year law student can critique a Supreme Court judgment. Let me just come out straight and say that even if you're a first-year law student, you can come out and critique a Supreme Court judgment. There's nothing wrong with that. You may be wrong, but somebody has taken the trouble to read your writing. That's the most important thing. Because somebody has read your writing to say, sorry, you're wrong, go look up this. That's not a bad thing. That's a great thing, because somebody took your writing seriously and felt necessary to respond to it. So please disabuse yourself of your notion that you have to have 5 years of law school and 5 years of experience before you write anything. Absolutely not.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to what Alok said, see, especially in the law, like for people who practice, the constant refrain is that till the day you die, you are learning. So therefore, if one has to have that level of saying, I must know everything before I write about, a particular event or a particular legal development, then that thing will never, ever get written. My only word of caution will be, see, as we see even in the political space, many a times you have these brilliant ideas. You say, Eureka. but always temper that idea with at least a basic literature review, so that you are confident in terms of what you are saying, and you are also confident in terms of knowing that what is essentially out there you have engaged with. So that's all. But this notion that I am on the first year, or I am only 1 year into the profession, that doesn't matter, because for Alok and me, we've graduated 10 years, which is nothing. It's nothing in the longer scheme, in the larger scheme of things. Yeah. So this other one question is on footnoting. Yeah. So at least personally, in my view, I never extensively footnote in the first draft, because I think it's too much of a deviation from my thought process. At least for the first draft, what I essentially do is I will just indicate the source in the bracket, so that later I don't have to keep searching for it. Also, if you are doing a very detailed piece, which has a lot of footnotes, I will suggest using this software. It's free source, called Zotero. So Zotero is an excellent free source software which makes it much easier for you to be able to footnote on the go. You may not need to use it if it's a shorter piece, very few footnotes, but for a very large academic piece, Supra, EBIT, everything, this software will take care of it. So I can't recommend it highly enough.
There's a specific question for me. Are paid publications pointless? Yes. Are journals claiming peer review the best to go? See, best in terms, yeah. Please, for everybody's benefit, if a journal is asking you to pay to publish, immediately withdraw your paper. It's clearly fraud. It is clearly academic fraud. There is a gigantic industry based on exploiting the need of academics to get published. And if any publisher, if any new paper is saying pay to publish, please assume that it is fraud. Please assume that they're exploiting you. Only go with journals which will accept it. It's a heartbreaking process. Trust me. Peer review, you can sometimes get a complete idiot who will review your paper and not understand what you're saying, in which case you'll have to start all over again. But a lot of times peer review is what separates the good journals from the bad. Now we are in a field where we can't claim to give objective truth all the time. It's not like with medicine, where if the research, if the data says so, it is fairly close to the truth. What we are is in more of the view of thinking and thought and analysis. And it's fine. It's possible that somebody might take a different view from you on a topic, but that doesn't mean you're fundamentally wrong. You have to be, of course, making sure that you've done the basic research, that what you're saying makes sense within the context of your field. And peer review helps you make sure that what you write is worth published. It gives you great feedback on what you're saying makes sense. But please do not pay to publish. It's a gigantic scam. Do not fall for it.
Yeah, I think on a connected note, there is a question that do journals and books having ISSN and ISBN numbers hold more value? Now, see, it entirely depends on what is the value that you are referring to. Now, if I am, say, the UGC, UGC is obviously obsessed with ISSN and ISBN in terms of being an identifying factor of the worth of a journal. But frankly speaking, if you see the proliferation of journals which actually offer paid publications, but actually still have an ISSN number or ISBN number, I really don't think it is anymore, a reflection of necessarily, being a quality journal. So therefore, I really don't think that would really, help in the larger scheme of things. Though, of course, if you're opting for a very specific purpose, you're opting for some position in an educational institution, and the UGC circular says, yeah, it must have an ISSN number, then possibly it will help, but not in the larger scheme of things. I don't think so.
Yeah. I'm just scrolling a little bit up ahead. Somebody has asked, what should I write daily? For example, I started an analysis of the editorial of the Hindu. Was not able to continue. So apart from the daily blog, what can I write daily? You started with the most complex and possibly the most irritating part of the newspaper, which is the editorial. I would say don't limit yourself to just writing for the CV or writing for your profession. If you have some interesting thoughts on a film that you watched or a book that you read, that is perfectly valid writing. That is still helping you think and see through things critically and understand them, make sense of what the maker is. And it's a different medium and needs to be critiqued in a different way. But you don't have to choose the most serious topics or the most po-faced issues to discuss. It could be something frivolous, but keep in mind, writing is a lot like exercise. No one says you're going to become a good runner only because you kept working on your leg muscles for 3 years. Because you are working on your entire body, giving it a certain kind of shape so that you can run. Likewise with writing. The more different kinds of writing that you do, the better you end up becoming. So don't limit yourselves in any way. Choose whatever picks your fancy. It could be that while you're on a walk, something interesting occurs to you, right? And you work on that thought, you work on that thought, you work on that thought, and it turns up in a blog post. Perfectly fine. Some of the most interesting pieces of writing have. I mean, yesterday I read an article about Parle G. Okay, it's something that we Indians take so much for granted. I cannot believe that no Indian, and the worst part of it was in a foreign publication. No Indian has written, I mean, or at least no Indian publication thought it fit to ask somebody to let's commission a piece on Parle G. It's like it's so obvious, it's so out there. But the Atlantic has this beautifully written piece linking Parle G to the issues of the lockdown, to issues of hunger, to issues of employment and the economy. That it's amazing. So please don't feel that unless you're writing about the most serious and the most earth-shattering topics, it's not worthwhile writing. That's not true. If you want to be a good writer, you should be willing and ready to write about anything that occurs to you, that's your original thought, and which you have something to say about.
Yeah. Now there is also a question, with regard to the number of footnotes. So somebody is asking, that if it's a 5,000 word paper, will 122 footnotes look bad? See, the answer to that is there is no formula like that. Unfortunately, now in a lot of these peer-reviewed journals, when I look at an article, the text is 3 lines.
Oh God, yes. Oh my God.
I think Alok should take this. Yeah, Alok.
No, George, I've actually stopped reading most of your Harvard Law reviews and your Yale Law reviews and foreign law, especially American law journals. It's madness. There are, as he just said, there are like 3 lines of text and there are paragraphs and paragraphs of footnotes. And I'm like, what am I supposed to read? Am I supposed to read your argument or who you're paraphrasing and where you're paraphrasing from? It's bizarre. I don't know how people thought that this is good writing which should get published. So no, please don't think footnotes will suffice or a lot of footnotes will make sense. As long as what you're saying is making sense and as long as what you're saying is well researched and thought out, footnotes are only just so that the reader is sure that this thought is your thought, that where you're citing someone, you are referring to them. It's just good hygiene. It is not the end of the paper itself. But yeah, please go on.
Yeah, so exactly. So therefore, I think both extremes need to be avoided, because whenever you state something, naturally, if it is not coming primarily from you, there needs to be a source. So therefore, to that extent, like Alok said, a footnote serves a purpose. But, this entire notion of puffing up an academic paper just by, inserting random footnotes, irrelevant footnotes, that's really something you need to avoid doing. Also, I think there is one question here saying from a second-year law student that, how does one really cultivate the vocabulary for academic writing? So therefore, see, like I said, all of us, we come from different backgrounds, like Alok mentioned, social capital, etc. So therefore, I think the one good way in terms of, say, refining or adding on to, vocabulary or the style of writing is essentially to read other forms of writing, but eschewing the merits and purely focusing on the writing style. For instance, you may have an article, excellent article, in terms of the content. But when you read it for the content, your brain is looking at it in a completely different way. Because then you are not so concerned in an express term with the way in which the paper has been written. Because your brain is getting the information, it's coming to you quickly, and you're happy with it. But whenever you read a piece from the perspective of being able to improve the way you write, I think like Alok mentioned, one should not just let these words slip in passively. So each word is pregnant with consequence in the term of the effect it has on the reader. So therefore, when you read an article from that perspective, for instance, how did the author start it? The author started with this sentence. He could have started with, say, 5 other sentences. How would you have started the article? If he got in a punchline in the middle, he or she got in a punchline in the middle, what is the placement of that punchline? Would you have done it differently? Therefore, I think, you need to go through a large amount of writing from this perspective. And then, I think it will be a task, or a tool which can really help, in terms of improving your style of writing. So that's at least what worked for me. But yeah.
So there's a question on, can publications benefit one for the higher education? See, this, as far as I can tell, nobody is going to be impressed by how many publications you have if your actual writing sample is terrible, right? And even if you have not managed to get 100 publications, maybe it's just one or maybe it's just two. But if your actual writing sample shows that this is a person who thinks critically, who is knowledgeable about this subject, and has something interesting and original to say about the subject, that will convince any LLM application reviewer more than how many ever entries you put into your CV about the publications. So your writing sample needs to be very good. I think what I said for your publication also goes for your writing sample. You may have a readership of 2. There may be a sum total of 2, maybe 3 people who might read it. But even for them, you put in that effort in that writing sample as if you would have put it in for a paper that you're going to publish. I'm 100% sure no application committee will turn you down, all other things being equal.
Yeah. So yeah, okay, there's a very interesting question. Fellow students are getting published day in and day out. How to deal with the pressure and stay consistent? See, frankly, I think Alok will probably answer this better, because I never, succumbed to this peer pressure in law school because I never bothered writing much. I was, I think, happy with my parliamentary debating. So therefore, I don't think, all of us learn from our peers. Like, I think I learned a lot at law school from my peers. I really learned and developed as a person. But don't let peer pressure be the starting point for a piece of writing, because as Alok mentioned, writing is a very intimate and an authentic experience, right? So therefore, if the very springboard for your writing is going to be, say, oh God, somebody else is publishing, I'm scared now, I need to publish something, I don't think that's an effective way to start. Therefore, in my opinion, as much as possible, wait for that idea, wait for that topic where you feel like writing about it, or wait for that stage in life when you feel like writing about it. And peer pressure is something which will exist at all stages in life, in all things. So therefore, as much as possible, that should not be the springboard, for taking up something like writing. Though of course it can serve as an inspiration. A peer doing well, you might be inspired, but don't think of it in the negative context. That's what all I can say.
To paraphrase, and just to round up what George has just said, to paraphrase our professor, Dr. Amita Dhanda, if you haven't already heard it from her, yeah, you may win the rat race, but you're still a rat. So don't treat publications as a exercise or a race in which you have to be, yeah, the first. If you have, again, I'm telling you, one impactful paper in a good journal which has something original to say is better than 100 average publications in 100 mediocre or paid for journals. Does not count at all. And I know a lot of you have questions based on specifically on academic writing. Keep in mind that the government, the UGC, has come out with a list of journals which it thinks are paid for, or there's a specific term for it. I'm just slipping out of my head. There is a list of journals which it has pretty much blacklisted, saying that we are not going to count publications in this because they're either pay to play or not exactly of the highest quality. Do check to see if a journal is in that list and don't send it there. I'm pretty sure a lot of the student law reviews in our country are excellent examples of research and excellent content, really good articles. And it is honestly a good effort that a lot of people, but a lot of them also don't exactly turn out the best quality of research. So if you want to get published somewhere because you need it as part of your academic career, have a look at which journals end up being cited elsewhere. That is basically what is impact. A journal which is being cited a lot in other places is what is impact. And you can look at global metrics of it, you can look at Indian metrics of it. You don't necessarily you have to start by saying I'll get it published in the Harvard Law Review. It can be something you can say I'll get it published in the NALSA Law Review. I mean, if it is something interesting and worthwhile, and in the days of Google and search engines, it will turn up when it needs to be cited by someone else. But make sure that you're right. That's the important.
Right. There is a question how to structure the very first draft. Yeah. So again, like I said, the first draft is something which essentially should be comprehensive enough to serve as a springboard for your eventual final written piece. Now, when I say this, what I intend to mean is that it should definitely encompass your central argument. So Alok mentioned an abstract. Now, an abstract obviously serves that purpose, but the only difficulty is it may be too short to be effectively called a first draft. But when you have a first draft in mind, things which you can leave out can be, say, the detailed, history behind that particular subject you are referring to, the detailed views of other commentators, detailed factual elaborations of judgments which you will deal with in the ultimate analysis. So the first draft, at least from my perspective, is something which contains basically a summary of the piece, but not in a pedantic sense. A summary of the piece by means of which every single central argument that you need to make is already there. So that then when you add on the layers, when you have the second draft, the third draft, not only can you add counterpoints, but you can also supplement what you've already written. So a first draft ideally should be something which should not require too much addition in terms of original thinking, but is something which will then be supplemented, or in certain cases you may find a counter argument which and opens up a completely new paradigm for you, in which case you will obviously add a certain original contributions also. So that entirely depends from person to person, but at least for me it is something which is the basic building block on which I can keep adding floors in terms of the different layers. That's at least my opinion.
There's a question on, actually there are two slightly related questions. Actually, no, I'll just answer these two questions very quickly. How diverse is the background of people who are into peer review? This is a problem because not enough people are offer their services as peer review because it takes up too much time and they're not compensated properly. Although the best place to find out this answer would be to ask the journals to make a list of people who have peer reviewed. It doesn't have to be that this person has peer reviewed this article, but it'd be great if journals were more transparent about who are the people who have peer reviewed their articles. Then we'll be much more easily, it will be a good way to find out how diverse these backgrounds are, and if journalists themselves need to work on improving the diversity of people who peer review. But it is a valid concern, and thanks for pointing that out. There's another person who's talking about, there's a blogging site and another blogging site. They're both producing academic articles. What to keep in mind to make your article best if you're not on the same topic? One is to make sure that you're engaging with all the arguments. Don't necessarily assume that the most exhaustive article is the best article. It may be that the best article has picked out on an aspect of the case that nobody else has seen or thought about or addressed. And I think that is what makes a blog effective, because it looks at issues from perspectives that others have not. It is your own perspective. Maybe 9 out of 10 times people may not notice and think, okay, what's the big deal? But that 10th time, when you will stand out as the person who brings your own voice to the issue. That you're the person that if you want to praise a judgment, or if you want to critique a judgment, or if you want to talk about a development or critique a law or something like that, it's your own voice, and you're not trying to constantly measure yourself by someone else's metrics, but satisfied that I have said something that I believe is true, and I think nobody else is talking about it. Try and be yourself and try and have a voice, and the way that you do that is, of course, by reading a lot. Please keep in mind, reading has to be the first step. Do not jump to the writing part before you take the reading part of things. So please keep that in mind.
Yeah, there's also, I think, one question in the sense of how brutal can you be, in terms of reviewing something, and then do you necessarily have to mince words? My answer would be no. See, because ultimately, if you take a stand, there are always going to be a lot of other strands of thought which you are opposed to. The only question is in terms of what is your natural language, because what I might find very aggressive, somebody else might not find it to be so. The only thing is, one should always restrict criticism, or let's say modulate criticism from the academic context in which it is being written, because you're not in a street brawl. So obviously outrightly abusing someone, saying someone is a fool, someone is stupid in an academic piece of writing, that I don't think is in most cases good form. But otherwise, in the sense of being critical of ideas, being critical of what they represent in terms of their overall impact it is perfectly acceptable to be extremely critical. And in fact, it is essentially the best articles are the ones that actually critique, which essentially tell us what is wrong with something which we otherwise might have consumed in a completely, let's say, unapologetic manner. So definitely criticism, or let's say being very forthright about what you believe is wrong in terms of a legal development or any issue for that matter, that is definitely not a disadvantage. But it is always better maybe to cater to editorial policies or otherwise, to always keep the language refined, even if you vehemently criticize the idea behind it.
Two people have asked almost the same question, so I'll put these two together and answer it. What is the best way to get an article reviewed professionally and getting feedback with respect to the content of the paper? There is no best way, but I think when I say the best way, I mean ask as many different people as possible. You could start with your colleagues and friends who are interested in this field, who know something about it, and ask them to give you feedback. You could ask your profs if they have time, and this is the important thing, because somebody is giving you the time willingly. So approach them when you know that they will have time to do this. You could ask your seniors from law school, you could ask your seniors in college, elsewhere, if they could spare some time to review a piece. It's always best to approach people you know, because the people you know will invest that time to give you the feedback that they believe is in your interest. I'm taking the term professionally here, not to mean for pay, but I mean somebody who will give you in a manner that will actually be effective for what you're trying to do. Ask for feedback from people you know. Ask them that what is the how best can I write this? Is this can this be improved in some way? And don't get discouraged by negative feedback, because I think negative feedback from someone suggests that they actually want you to improve, as opposed to somebody who's totally indifferent to it. If you can meet someone's expectation after they've given you negative feedback about, I think this is a really crap essay, you shouldn't have bothered with it, that means it's time for you to think about what you're trying to do and maybe get better at it. But ask for feedback from somebody whom you can approach, whom you can ask for that free time that they're going to give up on your essay to give feedback. So that'd be the best way to go about this. And as many people as possible, of course, within subject to time limits, however.
Right. There is a question: in the initial stages of finding something to write about, what process checklist would you prescribe to someone who has the drive to write but has difficulty zeroing in on a topic that's worthwhile? Right. So see, ultimately, I think once you start writing more and more, there is, like I said, it's an expression of what you want to talk about. So ideally, after a particular point in time, you naturally will get that, reflex action in terms of what you want to write about. But let's say from a more utilitarian perspective, where can one find sources in terms of what to write about? One example, for instance, can be in the case of judgments, or in the case of articles where if you see certain counter arguments are dealt with. In the case of a judgment, it might be the argument of the losing side. In the case of an article, it might be the identification of a counter view which the author disagrees with. Now, in such a setting, there might definitely be potential for you to identify a nuance in that counter argument or the lost argument, which you believe was not properly appreciated by the court, or was not properly appreciated, say, by an author who actually wrote about the subject. So that is one springboard possibly, where you can try and launch an idea for a completely independent piece of writing. Now, other than that, obviously, contemporary legal developments, there are statutes which keep getting enacted, and there are interpretations of those statutes, etc. So obviously, looking at contemporary issues is much easier. But another thing which I can suggest is, many a times we will, for instance, be confronted with aspects of the law which are, being written about constantly, but they may not have, let's say, taken into consideration developments generally in terms of the surrounding elements. For instance, if today you were to talk about certain concepts under the Arbitration Act, now, because you have the Commercial Courts Act, you have the Insolvency Code, etc., there is now an entirely new paradigm in terms of, say, treatment of commercial disputes. So what somebody has written about 10 years back on the Arbitration Act, which might otherwise, be seen to be the final word on the issue, might now require a fundamental reevaluation. So therefore, another good springboard is to take a look at recent statutes and try and take a look at the ancillary effects which these statutes may have on otherwise established areas of law. Because the natural temptation is, oh, there is an IBC statute, so let me look at what it does to the IBC regime. That a million people will have an idea for. But try and find the more nuanced developments. Try and find aspects which are generally overlooked. In a purely utilitarian perspective, these are possibly areas where you can take inspiration from.
Yeah, there's a very interesting question. How do you decide which are good articles, since there are no objective standards and there is of course subjectivity to it? So is acceptance or rejection really reflective of your writing skills? Let me start with the last question. Absolutely not. If somebody accepts or rejects your article, it doesn't mean you're a bad writer. There are about 100 reasons why somebody might not accept your journal, because somebody's already written about it, or there's just not enough space, or it's just not the kind of article that this journal publishes. Do not treat publication or otherwise as a reflection of the quality of the writing. It's a very simple test if you ask me whether something is a good article. One, did you finish reading it? There are so many articles that I give up because it's just so badly written that I can't be bothered to bring myself to the end. I know there might be something that this author wants to say, but they're just not getting to the point. It's not worth my time. If you finish an article and if it leaves you with something that you did not know before, right? I was just sent an article for peer review, which talked about this question of why did our constitution framers choose India and Bharat in the constitution and not the more popularly understood Hindustan. And I thought, okay, this seemed like a really trivial thing to write about, but the article is so well written and it gives me so much new information about how these debates were shaped and how people brought different perspectives into the Constituent Assembly, that I'm absolutely going to say, please accept this for publication immediately. Because I know that even 99% of constitutional law scholars will come away from this article going, I learned something new from this article. So to me, you can debate about whether it's a great article or not, but a good article meets only two tests, and there are nothing more than these two tests. Did you finish reading it? And when you finished reading it, did you come away with information that you did not know? And if it meets these two tests, it's a good article. Because if for example, it didn't tell me anything new as a person who studies constitutional law, it means I was the wrong audience. So whoever this article was aimed at, it was not me. So then what, which means, why did this get published in the first place? And if I couldn't finish it, it means it was written so badly that it couldn't capture my attention for more than the 5 minutes it takes to finish an actual article. So I would say this is the threshold. Beyond it, there is great and brilliant and amazing and astounding or whatever else there is. But if you can say that this article I read, I was able to finish it, and at the end of it, I got something from it that I did not know before, that's a good article.
Yeah, can you please give a broad list of legal reading that a law student can engage in? See, like again, this is possibly everything under the sun, but at least I thought that the kind of legal reading which essentially offered something new to me. One, of course, I think it's a great idea to read autobiographies or biographies of persons who are involved with the law. The interesting part with reading autobiographies or biographies is, even though the subject matter is essentially legal, the addition, of the individual element or the intimate details pertaining to a person, I think make for a beautiful mix in terms of, understanding the law and seeing it from a different perspective. Now, aside from that, obviously, you have a lot of legal literature also, which is not essentially academic or, or not really geared towards substantive analysis of legal principles, but veers more towards, let's say an examination of the basics of what the law is actually comprised of. Because the minute you come to say specific statutes, commentaries, etc., then you're really, entering into a very specified or stratified kind of realm. But I always thought that, reading those old classics, even something as basic as learning the law, it's a very basic text. But for a law student, I think that is, something which really helps in terms of a very, very foundational, fundamental understanding of how the, the law operates. Personally, for me, in terms of a compilation or in terms of reading material, one thing which really blew my mind when I was in law school was this reading material which Professor Amita Dhanda prepared for a law and poverty course. So law and poverty as a course and the material associated with it, at least for me in law school, was one transformative piece of reading. So for all of us, it's subjective. But I mean, if you ask me from a law school perspective, if that is available for dissemination, that is something I would definitely recommend.
There's another very interesting.
Sir,
Go ahead, sorry.
sir, since there's paucity of time, we can take a couple of more questions and concluding remarks.
Sure.
Yeah,
So
Alok,
there's a
go ahead.
it's a very interesting question someone has asked, and I'll read it out so that everyone can see it. I find it extremely difficult to make my articles interesting, even if I have been able to express my arguments effectively to people while I'm speaking to them. But when I try to write the piece, it comes off as, for the lack of a better word, boring. Now, somebody who writes a comment like this does not write boring. Okay, I think what your comment very effectively did was set up my expectation for something and sort of give it a twist, which made an interesting comment, made me pick it up and want to talk about it. Your own voice is interesting. I think what you're trying to do as whoever's anonymous attendee you asked this question is try and sound like someone else, and you're always going to fail at that exercise. It will come off as boring because you're trying to sound a certain kind of academic. You're trying to sound a certain kind of serious. You're trying to sound like a certain kind of, hey, look at me, I am important. No. Use your natural voice. Just from this comment, I can tell that this natural voice of yours is very effective in writing. And of course, subject to making small grammatical and other copy editing mistake, correcting all these smaller things. Your own natural voice is interesting. Let your natural voice speak when you write about things, and do not try to sound like someone else. You are going to fail, and which is why you may be finding that when you talk to someone, you come off as interesting, but when you write, it comes off as boring. I'd say that's a great problem to have, and it's a very easy problem to fix. It is the other one which some of us have been struggling.
Yeah, Tilak, I think I'll take the final question. This is actually something I'm asking Alok based on a comment. Alok, sir, your T-shirt is very nice. Probably cricket one. Yeah,
yes. That is a cricket T-shirt. This is supposed to be an India cricket T-shirt. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, Tilak, I think that do it for today.
Amit sir and Alok sir, thank you so much for this session. This was a topic on which many people wanted a session, and we had the pleasure to host you both for this topic. It was indeed a very informative and a motivating session which guided us how to go about academic and article writing. Thank you so much for taking out time for this. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sushrit, and thank you, Tilak, for having us over.
Thank you so much, sir.
All for attending this. I hope it was useful.
Yeah, it's helped us also, just revise what we otherwise take for granted.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Alok. Bye, Alok.